welcome to our fifth and final class of, or group discussion of this text that we've been studying, The 5 Invitations by Frank Ostaseski, What Death Can Teach Us About Living. Hello, Mark. Welcome. And yes, so as usual, I just want to tick off a few of the themes that I noticed from this week's reading. So this week, our fifth invitation is to cultivate don't know mind. Just a very interesting invitation. Can the don't know mind be cultivated? A very interesting question. But rather than get into that koan, I think I will just list some of the topics in our reading for this week, and then let you all start wherever you'd like to start. But so some of the themes in this reading are cognitive dysfunction in various forms, Alzheimer's, dementia, and other kinds of cognitive dysfunction, and fear of it or reactions to it. Memory, which also came up in our last reading, relative to the conversation about sati and mindfulness also, about which we could say a lot more, certainly. Reconciliation, consciousness, there's a big topic. Intimacy, enlightenment, emptiness, and the meaning of emptiness, which Frank puts forth a couple of different, I thought, ways of looking at it, not all of which I agreed with. Signposts or ways that people experience sort of signals or to-dos or a place to go when it's time, like the gentleman going to the Little Red Schoolhouse. Sacred meaning, surrender, maranasati, or reflection on death while you're still alive, and death poems. So those were some of the themes, big and small, broad and narrow. And yeah, so much to say, but let's see where you all would like to start.
Well, I really like the stuff on don't know mind, and I really feel maybe it's not maybe you wouldn't say it can be cultivated, but you can remind yourself to sink into it. Mm-hmm. That's been my experience, and I think don't know mind is very wonderful.
Yes.
And important.
And important in practice, certainly. Yeah, I appreciate that that bit of framing there, Sanghamita, that accessing don't know mind really has a lot to do with setting down or relinquishing or surrendering whatever it is that stands in the way, whatever kind of fixed view that we're holding on to. And once that is accomplished, or we may take some steps in that direction, you could say, then don't know mind is right there, right here.
Yeah, and then the more times you experience it, then the next time you come into a situation where you want to be in don't know mind, you have just more confidence because of how many times it's worked out so well in the past.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You can build some trust.
Yeah.
In that don't know mind.
Yeah.
Margaret, did you?
He spent some time discussing sacred places, and I was particularly struck, and to me, don't know mind applies here, where he describes the stillness and the quiet that are natural to places that feel like they're sacred, and then he describes what it's like to have someone come into the room where that stillness and quiet is established and disrupt it. And he does it so well because he talks about being at the Chartres Cathedral or Grove of Trees. And now imagine several tour buses suddenly arrive and 200 tourists disembark with their cameras and loud voices. And that to me rang so real, because I've been with people who come into situations like this with their own agendas and their own excitement and their own words. And even though they're visiting someone who's deathly ill or someone who's dying, they mean well, but they bring this energy that's exhausting under the circumstances. And if don't know mind were in there, then all of that would disappear.
Tell us the page you were referring to there, Margaret, just in case folks want to reference that.
The description of the tour buses coming in is, let's see, page 270 at the top.
Yep. Yes. And I was also struck by that. I thought that was a very, very insightful way of describing it. Very alive, a very insightful way of describing what can sometimes happen. And I think, he's putting a particular emphasis on that part of it, on the don't know and the being with what is and allowing for a space of quiet and withdrawal, certainly, by the person who's dying. But I want to say also, as we talked about earlier, there is a time and a place sometimes for taking care of some business, actually, at the end of life, too, for engaging in some heartfelt conversation, or tying up loose ends, or saying what you've been meaning to say for decades and haven't yet said, or there is sometimes a time and a place for that in the dying process too. But yeah, certainly once people get to a point where they are starting to experience some tranquility, it's a shame to come in and try to apply some need of one's own for interaction and disturb that space that they're in.
I'd like to offer something.
Mm-hmm.
First, I had my own teaching with this. I don't know if you shared Dhammadipa-san or not, but my stepfather died 2 weeks ago. So I was with my mom the day before he died until the burial, which was a week and a half later. So I'm sorry, classes, like I already had missed the first class, and then there was a lot of stuff as well. So I'm glad to be here, but it was also, I was reading this stuff along the way, and it was really helpful.
Good.
The thing I'm thinking about not knowing mine is like a sort of a near enemy when I feel like I'm being patronizing or playing along with somebody else, like if we're playing dumb or something like that, but it's as though it's a small scenario, and as soon as that situation is over, like all the rigor of statistical analysis and streets laid out on perfect maps will just return in that very ordered way. I think that having that kind of disposition to it is actually sort of like a near enemy or a defensiveness to a don't know mind that could be where things can really get the rug pulled out.
Yes. And it's an interesting tie-in, actually, to, sorry to interrupt you.
No,
just to say it's an interesting tie-in to where he started one of the chapters there in the reading, with how we cope with folks who are presenting with a mental state that we can't relate to. We think, oh, maybe this person will come to their senses, or maybe they're just telling a story, or we think somehow, we can play along with them, and it's just that, it's just play. Or I've seen actually situations, particularly with folks who have been together for very long periods of time, you know, family members, where there just isn't the patience for that. It's like, don't do that, as if this person had an ability to turn it off. So maybe, John, just as you're saying, you know, this kind of what I saw Frank described was in that situation with the gentleman who was in the hospital, right? That's what he was doing. He was doing that same thing, that same phenomena that you're talking about, this near enemy of not knowing mind, of just saying, oh, we're playing along here for a little while, and then realizing, oh, no, actually, it's not like that. This is really truly what this person is experiencing, and am I prepared to be truly engaged in it? Because that doesn't acknowledge my existence now.
Yeah, I think like an experience that I had where I felt like it was all kind of fun and games, and then I was like, whoa, was having I was having practice discussion one time with my teacher Vicky, and we were talking, and I was trying to visit my teacher who was had been moved to like a Alzheimer's facility, and I had visited like maybe 6 weeks before, and then I came back because I had heard that she'd stopped eating, and I was like, oh, she stopped eating, she's really serious. So I ended up spending quite a bit for a plane ticket, like $600 or $700 or something like that, which I normally wouldn't do. But I did, and then we were talking about this purchase in the Dokusan setting, and there was a sense of like, it got to whose money is that? like there was a sense of lack of boundary relative to what's in my wallet or something like that, and then and the purchasing process, and then I was like, don't tell me how to spend my money, you know, like I really had a buy in that moment. Like for a while I was kind of felt like I was playing along in the boundarylessness, and then I was like, wait a second, you mean to be that person sitting over there is now going to be the one who made this purchase? And you know, like it just was like, no. I just remember really kind of getting really angry.
Yes. Interesting. I'm not sure what you're describing there in terms of the discussion about the money, but certainly having clarity about our boundaries and also knowing them as constructed things, both of those two aspects can come into question when we're talking with somebody who's dying, right? And
I think it's just that sense of being a companion to somebody who's in a sort of forgetful state, and we feel like we're just maybe in a sort of a patronizing mode, and things are going along, and it seems like we're being helpful by kind of being in the playful, open mind state, and then it goes to the point of who's spending the money, or some area that feels like it's mine, and then it's like, oh, that's an you know what I mean?
I'm not sure that I know what you mean, John. I mean, what I can say is what I hope that we take from this part of the conversation is something like, don't know mind in a situation with someone who's dying is to take their expression as authentic, whether that is describing reality as we experience it or not. Right? Yeah. And just to say again, as even though we had some contact earlier, but to say, I'm sorry for the loss of your sister. Yeah. I've also had 2 friends die just in the last few months. That's what I was out for on Sunday. That's why I stepped out of my retreat on Sunday to go to the celebration of life of someone who had passed 51 days earlier.
Sorry.
Thanks. Oh, okay.
I'm going tomorrow to visit my 96-year-old mother-in-law, And I remember I had, and her memory is like, she doesn't have Alzheimer's, I don't think, but she definitely has age-related memory loss. So her memory is pretty well gonzo. Yeah, and most of us are able to just roll with that, but one of the daughters just takes it so personally and just causes her so much suffering. The daughter can't remember things. But I remember one very uncomfortable moment was, she's now in a nursing home, but before that, before she was in the nursing home, I was up visiting her for a week, and she was saying something about, oh, I should start thinking about or planning to, you know, to move into a home. And so I spent a few days on the internet finding out what was available. And so a couple of days later, I started sharing the information I'd found, and she just looked at me wide-eyed and said, "Are you trying to get rid of me?"
Oh.
So, I mean,
there you go.
It's classic.
That's
classic.
it right there. It is. That's iconic right there. That whole
area. I mean, I don't think I took it personally, but I mean, it was such a shock. But I felt so bad that she felt that way, that she felt,
right.
Yeah, that I, you know, so that was a major thought in my mind. It was a sort of an unexpected comment. Are you trying to get rid of me?
Rid of me?
Yeah. And there you were, just trying to be helpful, right?
That's right.
Exactly.
Two different realities.
Different realities, for sure. Mark?
A few weekends ago, I went to an event at Sanshin Zen Community, which was a workshop on working with death and grieving and loss, which was interesting. And some of the conversations here this evening kind of remind me of what I found to be a very useful lesson, and that was that they drew kind of a bullseye diagram, and in the middle of the bullseye is the person who, let's say, is dying. And the next ring outside of that is that immediate circle of the spouse, the loved ones, the family. And outside of that might be more remote family, very close friends. And you just keep having these increasing circles of maybe depth of acquaintance, perhaps you could call it. And the idea is that all of your support effort goes in toward the center of that circle, and everyone's avenue to help dump, if you will, the grief, the loss, the anxiety, the stress, the anger goes outward. And so you can kind of figure out, here I am, here's a person who's the center of this. And then there's these people very close to him. And I'm maybe 3 rings out. I'll never be in that center thing. And maybe I can help the person, let's say, who's dying. But also part of the Bodhisattva compassion is to support the next ring out.
Sure.
Because that next ring out really needs support. And they may not be acting with skillful means at that point. They're under unimaginable stress. Their lives are being ripped apart. And you can't hold them to that. You can't hold them to the same standard that you're at because you're so removed from it by several layers. And I had never thought of that. I've been through several very close family members who are now gone. And I know other people have had that, but I've never thought in terms of those concentric rings of support. And I think that's a very helpful way of maybe approaching it, at least for me in the future. Yeah,
it is a very interesting way of thinking about it. I mean, one of the things that often doesn't become apparent until after someone dies is those kinds of rings of influence or relationship. And there can be a broad mix in there. You know, sometimes people's family are not the folks on the inner ring. Sometimes those folks are way out on the outer ring. They are intentionally set outside, right? So kind of having the sensitivity to understanding the various relationships and how you can be supportive to folks in different relationships to someone who's dying is really, yeah, beautiful and helpful. And I would say, you know, with some skill, you can help anyone that's in contact with a dying person, no matter what their relationship to them is. But certainly the folks who are in the closest are the ones who oftentimes have what's known as anticipatory grief. We used to talk about this quite a bit in the hospice and in the hospital, you know. And it happens, in fact, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it often is triggered by losses in mental capacity. When that person stops remembering you as their spouse, then that can often trigger a very strong grief response. Like that you are already having to start to let go of that person. It's one thing to let go of a person in terms of their physical capacity, like they can't do this or they can't do that with me. That's a certain kind of grief. But then there's a whole nother layer, you know, layers and layers of grief that can happen before this person has died. And so being sensitive to that and being supportive around that is huge. It can really help the person who's dying indirectly in many, many ways, right? Because there is, again, kind of looping, I feel like we're looping back today, looping back a little bit to the busloads of tourists. You know, there can be this kind of disruption in energy, or this kind of sort of tug on a person's attention when they are doing the inner work of dying, whatever that is. We don't even know necessarily what it is for that person. But if there's a pull for their attention, or for them to engage in some kind of emotional way when they're already ready to move on, you know, then there's a certain kind of tension there, right? So we can relieve a little bit of that by being the person who is going to try to engage with that grief, or with that processing that needs to happen on the part of the folks who are not dying.
That's one aspect of Frank that I really appreciated, where he said, I think a few times, that they saw their job at the hospice to support people in whatever way was right for them to go through the dying process, rather than having some kind of an idea of this is how, these are the stages, or this is what happens with the person. So I mean, that would be part of don't know mind. You know, you don't know what this person's path is going to be, but you're there to support them, whatever it's going to be, and not try and fit them into your cubbyhole.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. It's a gift. It's a big gift, you know. And sometimes it means that we who are relating to the person who's dying have to set aside some of what we want to do or need to do, you know, and do that with other folks, right, Mark? Yeah. Or do that at a later time, or, you know, in writing, in all kinds of other ways.
And I was just going to mention that I just saw an article, and this wasn't it wasn't specific to people dying, but it was specific to caregivers of people who had Alzheimer's. And I think on average, the caregivers died earlier just because of the stress.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's like trying to be the person who is imposing the rules of how things get done, right? Like moment after moment, literally moment after moment, you know. And when you have a small child who doesn't understand that, for example, like a toddler who doesn't understand that running out in the street is not okay, they're more manageable just by their size.
Right.
But when you have an adult, who's lost track of that, it's like, whoa, you know, you can't just pick them up and sweep them off their feet on their way to the street. You have to actually deal with them in some other way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a big stressor. I think, in fact, one of the things also that hospice does is it gives people a chance, it gives caregivers a chance to take a breather. You know, we'd have volunteers just show up on a weekly basis for 2 hours so somebody could go out and get the groceries and spend 15 minutes in the park kind of thing. Just step out of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Which sounds like I'm touting the hospice, and it's not right for everybody, but I'm not touting it particularly, but I did see that it had a very beneficial effect on a lot of folks. You know. So what else?
I must say that I had trouble understanding his differentiation between letting go and surrender. I didn't understand the difference.
Mm-hmm.
I read it a couple of times, but it just didn't come through to me. And I don't know if it's important or not.
Yeah. Well, let's see. So he's talking about that in this like 274 area. Surrender is not the same thing as letting go.
Yeah.
Right.
Surrender is more about expansion, moving into flow. I'm not convinced that surrender is a choice. Yeah, it's such an interesting. I also found that kind of an interesting distinction to make there. Because certainly with respect to death, I mean, there are aspects of death that we have no control over. A whole lot of it, actually, most of it. And so then the way I'm understanding him saying surrender, which is not a choice, is something like non-resistance to those things. Non-resistance. Versus an intentional letting go of saying, okay, you know, this doesn't serve me, or I don't want my death to be like that, or, you know, a sort of more
just not fighting it anymore.
Just not fighting
Would that
it anymore. That's the way I'm understanding him saying something about surrender. Yes. Yes. And still there is this question for me about whether there can be, I think there can be a choice of non-resistance. There can come a point of being willing, of being allowing of the process of dying, or not. I mean, I remember distinctly there was an African American man who was a client of mine, and he lived with his daughter and son-in-law. And just a few days before he died, I went to visit him. Maybe about 2 days before he died, I went to visit him, and he was in a hospital bed, which is often the case for home hospice patients, so that they can be more easily taken care of. And the rails, the bed has rails on both sides, and the rails on the side facing into the room were down because it wasn't like he was in any risk of falling apparently. But the rail on the other side next to the wall was up, and he was holding on to this rail, like literally for dear life. No kidding. He was like intensely gripping the rail, which is not something he'd done in all the time. I mean, I'd been seeing him at that point for about 5 months, and I'd not seen him do anything like that. He was much more relaxed up until that day that I saw him like that. And I asked him about it actually. And he just said, he would just say that I'm holding on. He said, I'm holding on, I'm just holding on. And then he was dead 2 days later. And I was in shock because I even said to the hospice physician, I said, my goodness, having seen him 2 days before his death, I even had this shadow of a doubt, like did something nefarious and did something terrible, intentional happen to him, because he was full of energy and totally able to converse with me and holding on. He was very clear that that's what he was doing. And yet 2 days later, he was dead. So anyway, I tell this story because I felt later that I had to accept that although he wasn't allowing it, he was resisting dying until the very end, very physically, in a very physical manifestation of that. But still, it took him. And actually, then I thought more about that and thought, oh, this is also in the context of conversations about signs. Like people who are dying often get signs that it's time or that they're close, within a day or two.
They know. Mm-hmm.
They know, like they'll say things like, oh, there's an arrow, or I should, there's this, I know that I'm supposed to go through this door, or the woman who told me that she was going to get on the plane, but it wasn't time yet because the pilot of the plane said it wasn't time until next week. So, like people get various signs about what it is they think what it is that they're supposed to be doing sometimes. And I think maybe he had gotten the sign and he didn't want it.
There's something in here I want to ask about. I'm not sure if it's the right place or not, but I've been kind of curious about animita and nimitta as one of the entrances to Buddhism, like signlessness. Is there anything that you could point me towards of like, because it does seem like being immersed in meaning and signs, like let's say death is distressing and it's distressing to the ego, and like some of the very fabric that's holding it together is that sense of meaning or semiotics or whatever. So like as things are really kind of coming apart in a big way, that it does seem like the sign to see signs around oneself. Do you know what I'm saying? That can be a kind of a go-to state for the mind.
That signlessness or signs can be a go-to state for the mind?
That it's kind of a sort of a final grasping ground for ego is to see signs.
I see. I'm not sure whether I have experienced it as a final grasping ground for ego. I think I have experienced it as a way that people conceptualize the actual karmic process. That's how I would describe it. The karmic process of what happens at the dissolution of the body. But that's just my interpretation of the stories that I've heard and the things that I've seen people do. But signlessness, just to say, nimitta. So the times that we see that in the discourses, for the most part, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, signlessness is a very, very subtle mental state that requires an intensely composed, collected, quiet mind. So, for example, in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, it's said that the Buddha went through all the 8 stages of the jhanas, the form jhanas and the formless jhanas, and then came back through to the first jhana, and then went back up to, I believe, his 4th jhana, and he passed the last of the form jhanas. So that kind of person could go to a place of signlessness. That's what the formless jhanas are about in the mind. But you know, I wouldn't imagine that the average person lying on a bed somewhere or on the floor dying would be capable of taking their mind to a place of signlessness, even if they wanted to, even if they knew what that term meant, without having had a lot of practice in that. And that brings up the topic, which maybe we could open up more broadly, about, maybe you all have heard the phrase that our practice is a preparation for the moment of death, or for the time of dying. And I wonder, do you feel like that for yourself, that your practice is a preparation for dying? And if so, have you done any practice specifically that you feel will be helpful at that point? Or have you seen other people do that? I'd love to talk about that part. Do people feel like that phrase is an accurate depiction for you personally?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
I recite the 5 reflections very regularly, and
and the first of the 5 reflections is, I am of a nature to die. Not the first one, actually, is it? I'm forgetting the order of them. But
yeah, I'm not gone beyond illness and sickness and death. Of the nature to die. And I try and bring that to mind, that that the next breath I could be dead, like especially when I'm grasping onto things, and then it's just sort of, I remind myself, this could be my last moment, just to to help me not to grab so tightly. And anyway, it's certainly been very, I would say my husband's death, which was 9 years ago, really, because it was a sudden death, really made me very aware of how it could be any moment. Yeah. And, and I'm hoping, because, this don't know mind, we have no idea whether we're going to be in pain or not in pain, or whether it's going to be slow or it'll be sudden. And I think this was another thing. I think we talked about this on the very first invitation of Frank's, of I've forgotten now exactly what the phrase was, but just hoping that meet whatever it is in peaceful or calm way. Yeah, not have to be clutching the bed rail, trying to make it stop.
Yes. So you feel it seems like very aware of your practice as something that might support you to be able to surrender or let go, or perhaps both.
Yeah, I'm certainly hoping that. And where I've heard the phrase is not so much our practice in general, but the jhana states, that when we, when we've lost all of our senses and even a sense of self, that's a preparation for death.
Yes. So jhanas being the intense concentration states that are described in the early Buddhist discourses.
Yes, where you're not seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, thinking, you know, all of those are gone, and you're just having a pure mind experience. And I've had the experience once where there was a intense awareness, but absolutely no sense of a self having that awareness, just awareness, but without a self having that. And yeah, so so my understanding is having those experiences just help you not to freak out when you're when that all those things are happening at death. You know, because when you're dying, everything's shutting down, all the senses are shutting down. And yeah.
Yes, John.
My feeling is practice the way I've been doing it is helpful for sort of the lead up to dying, at least dying as I conceive of it, but not for dying itself. Like it's a refraining from freaking out quite a ways into it, but that there'll be some sort of leaping that, you know how we say sometimes like refrain from, or if you're gonna do 100%. Sometimes there's that sort of saying in Zen, it's like there's that either or where it's like just really go for it if you're gonna go for it. For me, the way I practice tends to emphasize not freaking out about like weird mind states coming up and letting them come and go, lots of things like that. And that was my experience in being with my stepfather the night before he died, was how palpable unusual mind states were, and that they seemed embedded in the Alzheimer's unit that he was in. Like they didn't seem like they were coming from my mind. They seemed like they were all around just a kind of a Halloween sort of a mind state, if I could say. So like that sort of sense, and being able to be among it and not freak out, I do think practice helps with that. But that sort of thing, like maybe if I did a Shuso ceremony where I have to bang, bang, bang answer things and can't, you know, just have to impulsively do things, maybe then I would be able, that would be something closer to like diving into dying. But that hasn't been my practice so far. So I mean, that's a conception of dying. I don't know what dying's really like, but I think of it's sort of like whitewater rafting, where I would be like at some point just having to just go for it or something. And I don't think it can help with that, or at least it hasn't, not as I've been doing it.
Okay, Dana, you had your hand up.
I think that how our practice helps us in living, that it would help us in dying if we have our minds. You know, it sounds like in the group, you know, I took care of both my parents at different times, but they both had cognitive problems. And I always, whether this was a skillful thing to think or not, I always thought maybe they were a little lucky that their bodies and their minds were sort of going at a similar place. And neither one of them were too terribly fussed. I felt bad for their loss. But they had humor and could giggle, and, you know, Jell-O was a great thing. And, you know, my dad wasn't at home, but my mom was. So there was simple pleasures, but the actual dying, I don't know. It's kind of, I think in this day and age, you're not, maybe you are in pain. Everyone said, you know, you can be in pain dying.
Yes.
I haven't observed that close hand. You know, the morphine seems to help people feel some peace. But in my own dying, you know, I get kind of graspy, hoping that I'll be a better person at this point. That I have work to do. That's what I think about.
Okay, that's an honest answer. Yeah. Next, who else would like to share about their practice and what their, yes, Margaret?
I tend not to think about it in terms of dying. I think of it in terms of living every single day and cherishing every single day And it used to be, and maybe I'll do it again, it used to be my practice when I went to bed each night to ask myself, if I got a phone call in a half hour saying you will be dead by midnight, what would you regret about the day? And more often than not, I would not regret anything. Whether I had spent the day cleaning the house or weeding the garden or visiting with friends or whatever it was, I didn't regret it. And I've had several friends killed like that in automobile accidents where there was no dying process.
Yes.
They were fully alive, and seconds later, they were gone. And I don't know if that will happen to me, but it can, and it's a potential for any of us. And what will matter will be how we've lived and how we feel about how we've lived. And I think we would take that into the dying process.
Yes.
I don't fear the dying process. I fear certain levels of indignity that may happen, and that may be where letting go and surrender are going to need to kick in big time. But right now, I don't fear it. I don't mind being dead. I've not been there that I'm aware of, but that doesn't scare me.
There you go. Okay, Mark and Michaela, anything you want to share?
I'll jump in. We kind of had a conversation at our Zendo last week along these lines, and what I found myself saying, and I'm sitting here thinking I still believe it, and bear with me. When my first son was born, we knew that was coming for a long time. Early in life, you understand how that works mechanically. There's no conflict in your mind there. And then as the pregnancy's confirmed, you have all these, oh God, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And this is how it's going to be. And so everyone says, are you ready for this? Yeah, I'm ready for it. This is great. This is the greatest thing. And then that literally, that very moment that the doctor put my son in my arms was just boom. There was no preparing for it. It was the most miraculous event in my life at that point. It was the most miraculous thing that ever happened. And I am skeptical that anything I had done to prepare for that, whether it was a spiritual practice or a life practice or painting the bathroom and baby room, prepares you for that. I don't think it does. But it also, though, maybe naively, gives me the confidence that when that time comes, you'll just know what to do. And I'm not terribly worried about it. I don't think it's, and maybe that's where my practice over the years will come in, is hopefully I can do it calmly, maybe more calmly than before, but that in my mind is going to be second to whatever that visceral explosion of suchness is at that moment.
Thank you for sharing all that. Yeah. I don't know if I don't want to be the last one to speak, so maybe Michaela, if you have something to share, then I'll share first and then you can share last. How's that?
Okay.
Okay. So I could say that there's a truth to the fact that there's no way for me to know how it will happen. It could be very, very immediate, or it could be very long and drawn out and involve a lot of suffering. There's no way for me to know. And that said, having developed as best I can a mind that would be able to be present for the roller coaster, you know, like that sudden huge dip where your stomach ends up in your throat kind of event, or the lead up to that, or whatever it is, right? Having developed a kind of mind that could have a modicum of presence in all of those situations would be helpful, I'm quite sure. I'm sure because I tend to agree with what was said earlier, which is that having experienced states of complete withdrawal from the senses and withdrawal from the one who knows, and withdrawal from, you know, any kind of sense of boundary, and be able to rest in that has opened up things, has opened up a kind of mind that I could rest in. So for me, I feel like it's much more true now than it was ever for me before. Like as the years go by in practice, it's even more true than it has ever been, that my practice is preparing me for death, whatever kind of death comes, whatever kind of death comes. And that said, yeah, it's I love the metaphor of this woman in the book who says, you know, before I came to America, I saw the pictures and I read about it and I heard people's stories about it, and you know, I bought my plane ticket and I learned English and I thought I knew what America was, but actually I didn't know until I set foot in America what America was. Right? So there's also this thing that the Buddha called seeing with the body, seeing wisdom, seeing a truth, seeing reality with the body. You know, and I think that, and having the body fall off, then that is like, you know, where the rubber will actually meet the road there, because it will not be whatever I think it is. But those framings actually do make a difference too. I think that I've also seen that over and over and over again. The way that people frame what they think the experience will be like has an actual effect on what that approach, that if you get time in the approach, does have an effect, what you think it will be like, whether you think it will be horrible or you think it will be blissful or you think it's a journey or whatever it is you think it is, it does have an effect on the mind if you get that time in that process. And like you were saying also, Dana, you know, the once there is a certain kind of you could say lack of control or lack of form to the way that one's mind is, when you don't have that, you know, that kind of intentionality that you had before, if that happens, then again, it's like even more important what the underlying tendency of mind is. Even more important, because that's where you're going to be abiding. It's just in whatever underlying tendency you've developed over that lifetime. That's what I think. Anyway, Michaela, now it's your turn.
Okay. Well, I think, yeah, it's helpful to practice to prepare ourselves for death. I look at it in terms of regret, as Margaret mentioned, in terms of how we live. But if I should answer the question, if I practice like to prepare myself for death, then I think it's no, I don't feel like, I don't understand my practice like preparation for death. But I don't know, like why I practice it. It just makes sense. So. Yeah, and if I'm scared with death, like right now, I don't feel like there will be many things I should do before that. But when it comes, like who knows? It's like it reminds me those days when I feel like I'm not scared of pain, but the other day you have this terrible headache, and you can just think like, where is my ibuprofen? Go the street. So that's how. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right, so we have maybe just a few minutes left here. If there's any last topic or reflection or question that folks would like to put forth. Yes, Mikhaila.
Actually, when you and Dana talked about loss of control, it reminded me the example of a Buddhist teacher with Alzheimer. He lost his mind, but still was able to stay somehow centered. So it was interesting.
That was a beautiful example, right? That was a beautiful example of him just saying out loud, right? The sort of awareness of the things that were passing through his stream of consciousness at that moment, and just naming them. Really beautiful example, right?
Yeah,
sort of like zazen out loud.
Yeah, he was able to go into that place. I was like, what? Is this possible?
Yeah, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Back to that, right? That the mind will tend to return to the things that we have repeated in our life. The mind will just tend in that direction. You know, we do have actual habits, and like, as they say, you know, the neuroscientists, like grooves, where the mind wants to go back again and again to the things that we've done in our lives. Yeah. Yes, Dana.
I did enjoy the haikus on page 281. I'm not much of a drinker, but I like the haiku about being buried in a tavern, being so mild. I thought that was skillful intentionality maybe for that person, but it was funny.
Yeah, it was funny. Yeah. No, the death poems are always fascinating to me, you know, like it's like, pick one thing out of your experience to hold up as sort of emblematic, or maybe two things, you know, and what people hold up. It's just fascinating. Yeah. Have any of you written a death poem? It's probably too early. Although you don't know if it is or not. Yeah. I really appreciated Sono's death poem also, the one at the very end there on 282. Soon enough the seas will sink your little island. But take only new seeds and an old stick. And I thought, wow, I wonder if this person knows, like there's this metaphor, right? Seeds as, you know, are used in various different Buddhist schools, different ways. But one way that they're used is sort of potentiality, mind, where when we do something or we see something, we have some kind of an experience, and then it sets up a potential for a future thing, a future expression or a future fruit to come forth. So I doubt that she she knew that part of seeds, but to me it was very, very beautiful, that metaphor. Take only new seeds and it'll stick. Yeah. Well, so it seems like we're coming to the end here, unless there are any last comments or questions. Goodness knows we could just keep going for months and months and months. And
there is one other line. It's not one of the death poems. On 264, when he's talking about the sacred, he says, to know the sacred is not to see new things, but rather to see things in a new way. The sacred is not separate or different from all things. It is hidden in all things, and dying is an opportunity to uncover what is hidden.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was beautiful.
Yes.
It's about halfway down the page, 264.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It speaks to the way that we make meaning from our world. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Whether we see something sacred in it or not. One of the basic ideas, I think, of the sacred is also being part of something larger than oneself. Having that sense of being part of something larger than oneself. And so in Buddhism we have conditionality, we have that way of understanding the interdependent arising of things, including ourselves, including ourselves, right in the midst of all that. Beautiful mechanism working perfectly all the time. Yeah.
I was very touched by the story of the young man whose appearance put people off, but who did those beautiful videos for the people.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
What did you like about it, Sangamita?
Well, just over my lifetime, I've learned not to judge by appearances. So that was a number one thing. Just his incredible creativity. I'm always in awe of creative people, and just his creativity was so lovely.
Beautiful. Yes. And I thought what was sweet about it was that he was giving them an opportunity to go where they couldn't go. Mm-hmm. Here are these people in the hospital, right? They are so sick that they can't leave. And he gives them an opportunity to go some blessed place that they'd like to see, So.
And he's rejected initially. Mm-hmm. And then he gives this gift, and then he disappears.
Yeah.
And Frank speaks of him as a bodhisattva.
Mm-hmm. Yes, freely giving the gift, right? Just freely giving the gift with no strings attached. Just come and do that thing. Yeah, it's a lovely story. And I can totally see that too, right? Like some young kid with funky hair walks into the hospital. It's like, yeah, I want to, like talk to
tattoos
you.
And piercings.
Yeah, I want to talk to your dying people. It's like,
Right.
Is this okay? Is this really going to be okay? Is this person going to be respectful and appropriate? And, Yeah. Seeing it with fresh eyes, perhaps. Yeah. All right. right, folks, I think that we'll wrap it up for now. So I hope that this has been a helpful and beautiful exploration for you, and that in some way it helps you feel like you could approach your own death more skillfully. So be well, and
Thank you.
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Beautiful participation and full participation. We'll keep the forum up for a while yet, probably for a few months, if folks want to continue to have some dialogue there and some engagement and continue sharing photos or poems or stories or whatever you'd like. And of course, as usual, the class page will stay up for a while too, if you want to go back and look at recordings of any sort or listen to recordings of any sort. I'm a little behind on getting the MP3s up, but they will go up. And yeah, and I'll be in touch with all of you again next time that there's a class or a book group.
Thank you.
All right. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.